Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Sagas of Swamp Thing podcast. Today, we are reading issue number 17, but first things first, just a little catch-up on what happened in the last issue. It started off on a commercial plane that Matt Cable and Abby had chartered because they are on the trail of their friend Bolt, who was kidnapped at the end of issue 15. But unfortunately, this plane got skyjacked, and as the plane was flying over the Caribbean or somewhere like that, the skyjacker was getting ready to jump out, and he was threatening the stewardess. And unluckily for him, Swamp Thing was in the cargo hold right next to him, and he was able to burst out and save the stewardess's life. But in the process with the fight with the man, Swamp Thing ended up smashing into a door, which opened up, and then him and the skyjacker fell out. So him and the skyjacker fell, and the skyjacker died when they landed, but Swamp Thing did not. And Swamp Thing ended up being found by a couple of rebel freedom fighters. And as they were in the process of trying to recruit Swamp Thing to join their side, Swamp Thing stepped on a trap, got hit in the head, got captured by the army that had taken over the island. So he gets captured, and then it turns out that the rebels had a voodoo priestess on their side, and she raised an army of the dead to fight these soldiers. So when they got to the town, it ended up Swamp Thing was able to break out of the prison he was being held in, and then there was a big fight between the military and the army of the dead. And Swamp Thing was, of course, freaked out when he saw these dead people fighting alongside of him. And I guess he thought that was kind of unnatural, and he realized that the voodoo priestess who was nice to him originally was the one who was doing it. So he ended up breaking her magical amulet, which made the army of the dead fall back to being dead. And then the military guys shot her and her main commander guy. So I guess Swamp Thing ended up ruining a rebellion against a dictatorship? And then he kind of just walks off into the woods, like always. Sad, of course. We left off with that issue with a flash to what's going on with Bolt, because he is being tortured by none other than Nathan Ellery, the one-time head of the Conclave that supposedly died in issue 7. But now he has returned, and he has some kind of suit that keeps him alive. He is bound to a wheelchair, but he still wants the Swamp Thing. And that is where that issue left off. So first things first with issue 17, we got the cover. We see Swamp Thing is battling what looks like robot dogs. There's one attacking him and jumping on his back, and then there's 3 more about to pounce. And of course, all of this is happening at night in front of a blood-red moon. And as we turn to the first page, we see what looks like an old Spanish mission. And the narration says, Sanibel Mission. It cracks the forest, clearing like a dead-toothed smile, quiet and serene as the verdant jungle that surrounds it. But as with man, appearances can oft be deceiving, and a building's peaceful facade can sometimes mask a most desperate turmoil within. Then we cut to the inside of the mission, and we see this is where Nathan Ellery has his lab where he is torturing Bolt, and it looks like he has him strapped to an electric chair kind of device, and there are some sort of electrodes that are put onto Bolt's temples, and they are electrocuting him. And as they do, Nathan Ellery says, Come, Mr. Bolt. Sooner or later, you will tell me what I want to know. So why don't you? And then they stop shocking him to give Bolt a chance to speak, and he looks at Nathan Ellery and says, Eat moose, you dirty. But Ellery cuts him off, saying, Your obstinacy begins to bore me, Mr. Bolt. Dr. Pretorius, increase the... But he is also cut off by one of his henchmen, who turns and says, Mr. E, blips on the detection screens. One intruder activating trap 34 on the eastern perimeter, and 2 others moving in from the west. And Ellery turns his chair to look at the screens, and he says, Well, don't just sit there, imbecile. Send a task force to greet our visitors from the west. And the henchman replies, What about the other one, sir? And Ellery answers, You forget. I designed the defenses myself, dolt. When number 34 finishes with our unwitting trespasser, there won't be enough left of him to bury. Then we turn the page and we cut to Area 34, where we see Swamp Thing is battling a robot. And this thing is pretty dang big. It's got 7 telescoping arms that are grabbing at Swamp Thing, and they have claws at the end of each of them. And it doesn't have legs, it actually has tank treads, and then there's a giant fan in the middle of its, I guess you'd call it its torso, because the upper half of it is kind of humanoid, I guess. And in this panel, we get the narration that says, Exit Sanibel Mission. Following the winding jungle paths a short mile eastward, through teeming Caribbean undergrowth, part the dry-barked branches of a banyan tree, rimming at a sun-slashed glade, and step right into the welcoming arms of a nightmare. So as Swamp Thing struggles against the arms that are grabbing at him from this robot, he thinks, "Lord, this stainless steel monstrosity just popped up out of nowhere, and something tells me these aren't just hugs of affection. Got to keep it from pulling me into those spinning blades, or it's all over." We also see on this page that the name of this issue is The Destiny Machine, and it is written by David Michelini with art by Nestor Redondo. So as the robot begins to pull Swamp Thing towards it, Swamp Thing grabs onto a tree, and he thinks, "No good. Too many tentacles. Can't pull away. But if I can't break loose, maybe I can at least toss a monkey wrench where it'll do some..." But Swamp Thing's thoughts are cut off because he has grabbed that tree and uprooted it, and as he shoves it into the chest area where the fan is, thinking that it might break the blades, the tree ends up just getting chopped up like it's nothing, and Swamp Thing thinks, "Huh? It's shredding the tree like a soda cracker. Got to find something more substantial." So Swamp Thing grabs one of the arms of the robot, and he's able to tear it free from the robot's shoulder, and he thinks, "And judging from the way these metal arms are cutting into my hide, I'd say they're just the thing to give my shiny friend here indigestion." And with that, he throws the arm into the fan blades, and that does jam them. And I guess the fan was integral to the robots as far as its mechanical systems. So as the fan is jammed, it begins to shake violently, and then it explodes. And Swamp Thing is actually blown backwards onto his back, and as he gets up, he thinks, "Phew, a few seconds more of that squeezing, and I'd have ended up a pile of mossy putty. But destroying that thing doesn't answer the questions it brought up, like what a stainless steel octopus is doing in the middle of a jungle, and who made it, and why. It may sound a bit trite, but there's something very odd going on here." Then we turn the page and we cut to somewhere in the distance to the west. And if you remember, the henchman told Nathan Ellery that there was one being in Sector 34 in the east, and then there was two beings walking in the west. So we see that the two beings were in fact Matt Cable and Abby Arcane, and as they walk through the jungle, I guess they've been talking, and Matt Cable asks Abby, "What do you mean by odd, Abby?" And Abby replies, "I don't really know, Matt. It's just that I sense something evil about this jungle." And then Matt kind of looks worrying at her and says, "Yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you about these feelings you keep having, ever since one of them helped us out with that scrape with Father Bliss. But that'll have to wait." And what they're talking about there is in issue 15, when they were captured by Father Bliss, it seemed like Abby maybe got some kind of sixth sense that was awakened while she was tied up in the basement. They didn't really go into it too much, but it seemed like maybe she's possibly telekinetic and maybe possibly psychic as well. So Matt apparently hasn't had time to really bring that up and talk to her about it, but like he said, it'll have to wait, because he says to Abby, "We came to this stinking island to find Bolt, and right now," but he's cut off as someone off panel says, "Right now you'll turn around, friend, real slow." And the two of them turn to see the henchmen of Nathan Ellery, and I should mention they look pretty much the same as they did back in the earlier issues, which if you don't remember was them in skin-tight bodysuits that cover everything except for their face and hands. And they used to be red, but now they are purple, so they kind of look like that pulp character, the Phantom, but then they also have yellow Speedos over that. So as Abby and Matt turn and see four of these guys standing there, Abby yells, "Matt!" And Cable moves his hand towards his belt, which has a gun on it. But before he reaches it, the lead henchman raises his Tommy gun along with all the others, and he says, "I wouldn't go for that gun if I was you. The boss said to bring you in alive, and I hate to disobey orders. Now move." Then we get a panel of Matt Cable and Abby being brought into the mission, and as they walk surrounded by the men, Matt Cable says to Abby, "I don't like it, Abby. The uniforms these bozos are wearing, that helicopter that lifted Bolt, it all fits. If I didn't know better, I'd say we were up against." And then the lead henchman opens a door into the laboratory area, and as Matt Cable and Abby are ushered into the room, Matt Cable finishes his thought as he sees the man in the wheelchair sitting before him, and he exclaims, "Nathan Ellery!" And Abby is very surprised to see him, and she says, But you died." And Nathan Ellery replies, "Quite right, Miss Arcane. I did die. But you don't think the Conclave would give up one of its top operatives that easily, did you? Unfortunately, the fall that necessitated my miraculous resurrection left me somewhat immobilized. But I'm afraid that couldn't be helped. It is enough that I am here, and now that you are here..." Then from the corner of the room where the electric chair is, Bolt begins to wake and moan, and Abby hears him and she cries out, "Bolt!" And then Matt yells at Ellery, "You slime! Whatever you've done to him, I swear I'll do you double." And Ellery replies, "An historic boast, Mr. Cable, but one that you're in no position to carry out." And then the henchmen grab onto Matt Cable, and one of them grabs Abby, and Ellery continues saying, "Don't worry about your stubborn friend. I'm through with him. You all possess the information I seek, and I'm sure I can gain it much easier now from Miss Arcane. Bogan, strap her in the..." But just as the henchman named Bogan grabs onto Abby to drag her over to the chair, Mr. E is cut off by one of his henchmen who is looking at the screen again, and he says, "Mr. E, that blip on the eastern perimeter, it's still coming." And a very surprised Mr. E says, "What? But that's impossible. Activate the monitors. It must be in visual range by now." So the henchman switches to video mode, and on the TV screen that they're looking at pops up an image of Swamp Thing, and Ellery gets a big smile on his face, and he says, well, after all my efforts, it seems the fly has come to the spider." Then we cut to Swamp Thing, who is walking around in the jungle, and he's thinking, "A great Boy Scout I'd make. Can't even find my way back to..." But his thoughts are cut off as someone says, "So, my ponderous friend, we meet again at last." And Swamp Thing turns, and he sees a TV screen popped out of the ground, and it's looking at him, and Ellery's face is on it, and he thinks, "What? You?" And the narration says, "Surprise, incredulity, and loathing, especially loathing, tear at the Swamp Thing's soul as he stares. An emotional potpourri laced together by memories of sabotage in a marshland lab, an explosion that soaked the agonized form of Dr. Alec Holland in a searing mass of unclassified chemicals, sending him screaming into the nearby swamp, only there to rise once more no longer a man, but a hideous thing. A thing that had lost not only its humanity in that Holocaust, but a loving wife as well. A loss the newly risen man-brute had sworn to avenge." So because this is the first time that Swamp Thing has seen Nathan Ellery since issue 7 when he thought Ellery died in Gotham, we get a little bit of a flashback, probably for new readers, so we got like the whole origin just then, and then we're getting flashes of what happened in issue 7 where he was fighting with Ellery, and then Ellery tripped over his animal and fell off the balcony. But Swamp Thing's memories of these events are cut off by the television screen that pans over from Ellery to Matt Cable and Abby and Bolt, and the TV says to Swamp Thing, "I've been looking forward to this, monster, more than you can know. In fact, I've even provided an extra incentive for you to join me." And as Swamp Thing sees his friends on the screen, he thinks, "Cable and the others." Then Ellery comes back on the screen and he continues saying, "We await you in an old mission due west of your present position, and I suggest you don't tarry. For every hour you delay, Mr. Cable or one of his friends will die, painfully. And lest your little stroll become tedious, I've provided certain amusements along the way to make the journey a bit more, shall we say, interesting." And at that moment, Swamp Thing hears something behind his head, and we see something in the sky that looks like a flying saucer, except it has coming out of it a telescoping magnifying glass, and the narration says, "It hisses softly across the shimmering glade, reflecting the morning sun like a floating polished coin, its slender metal neck moving slowly from side to side, like a wary cobra, a serpent that strikes with fangs of fire. So as it gets close, it raises its magnifying glass and catches the sun, which then shoots a beam at Swamp Thing, and it actually cuts into his shoulder, and as it does that, Swamp Thing thinks, that lens, concentrating sunlight, like a huge magnifying glass, burning! So he takes off running, and as he does, the saucer continues to fire laser beams at him, and he continues thinking, it's following me. The blasted thing must be equipped with some sort of tracking device. Can't get away from it. Then we cut back to the lab and we see Matt Cable, Abby, and Ellery looking at the screen. And Matt Cable says, "But why, Ellery? Why are you doing this?" And Ellery replies, "Don't be obtuse, dear boy. How would you feel towards something that had turned you into a twisted monstrosity? I want to see that swamp thing die, Cable. Die. Oh, I admit, I was after the monster's secret at first, coveting the power that the biorestorative formula it hides would bring. But that matters little now, for I'll soon have all the power in the world. Literally." Then he motions to Dr. Pretorius, who's standing to his right, and Cable looks at him, and Ellery continues, "Dr. Pretorius, show our guest your little invention." And Pretorius replies, "Yes, sir, Mr. E." Then he goes to an area in the lab that is curtained off, and he pulls it back to reveal a giant machine that says danger high voltage. And this machine's kind of hard to describe. There is one part that looks like a bed that someone would lay down on, but the rest of it is all just science stuff that looks like electricity goes through it. It's kind of like Frankenstein's lab or something. And over this panel, the narration says, "The soft whisper of silk on stone, and dark curtains draw back to reveal a scene that would make even the maddest of Frankensteins take pause." And as the machine is revealed, Ellery says, "Behold, the Ultra Celebrositor." And Matt looks at the machine and says, "Very impressive, Ellery. But just what does this little tinker toy gizmo do?" And Pretorius answers, "Well, you see, some months ago, my research led me to discover what I call E-waves. Brainwaves that relate directly to the ability of leadership in human beings. I found those who emit E-waves lead, and those who don't follow. This, gizmo simply focuses on those waves on a worldwide scale, scrambles them, and turns the brains of their originators into mush, with, the exception of anyone in this specifically shielded room, of course." And then Ellery chimes in, "And naturally, with every capable leader turned into a babbling idiot, the world will be ripe for, well, to make a long story short. How does Emperor Nathan I sound to you, Mr. Cable?" Then we turn the page, and we cut back to the jungle where Swamp Thing is still running from this flying saucer that's shooting sunbeams at him. And in the first panel, as Swamp Thing dodges a beam that nearly misses him, and it hits a tree instead, he thinks, "Swell, this tree's about as much protection as a paper doily." And then he takes off running away from what little protection the tree gave him, and he continues thinking, "If I don't do something soon, there won't be enough of me left to fill a crematorial urn. But what? Wait, that thing was obviously built to deal with something running away from it, but it doesn't know how to cope with a frontal attack." And with that, Swamp Thing turns and begins to run towards it, and he continues thinking, "It's risky, but I've got to hope that lens is programmed to destroy anything that stands in its way, including itself." So as Swamp Thing's running towards it, the beam, of course, is following Swamp Thing, and he jumps underneath it, and the magnifying glass's beam continues to follow him, even as it begins to hit its own craft and melt its body. And then it gets too far into its body, and it explodes. Then we cut back to the laboratory with Mr. E, and the henchman that was looking at the screen says, "Mr. E, the controls on the sun disk just blinked out." And Mr. E looks at the screen and says, "That blasted Swamp Thing is more resourceful than I thought. Seems I'll have to arrange a suitable welcome for him myself." And with that, he leaves the room to prepare the surprise welcome for Swamp Thing. And once he's gone, Cable turns to Dr. Pretorius and says, "You're not the criminal type. Why are you helping that madman?" And Pretorius answers, "Why? Because I'm scared, Mr. Cable. Not only for myself, but for the very world." And Matt's confused and he asks, "What?" And Pretorius continues explaining, "Oh yes, the world. Why, just look at the newspapers. There's nothing but wars, deceptions, crises. The world is dying, Mr. Cable, and all because of petty squabbles of global politics. The only hope is to unite the world under one man, one strong leader who can rule with a firm hand, a man like Nathan Ellery. And though you may not agree with my methods, isn't the future of the world worth a few paltry lives? And Matt stares at him with contempt and says, Mister, you are sick. Then we cut to outside the mission, where Swamp Thing is stumbling out of the jungle towards it, and he looks at it and thinks, this looks like the place Ellery described, and if those sentries are any idea of his security, I shouldn't have any trouble. So he continues to walk towards the mission, and we get some narration that says, but trouble is a mild term, Swamp Thing, to describe what you will see when you whirl to the soft pneumatic hiss behind you. And under this narration, as he's walking, we see behind him there are some shadows on the ground. And as we turn to the next page, we see he must have heard the hiss of the pneumatics, because he is turned around now, and he's staring at 5 all-metal mechanical wolves. And the narration continues saying, find yourself face to face with an impossible steel-gutting vision of hell. And as Swamp Thing sees these robots, he thinks, robot wolves. I should have known Ellery would have something else up his sleeve. And the narration says, they attack swiftly, the fetid stench of ozone mingling in the hollow rasp of feral metallic snarls. A ripping, shredding horror that would leave a man fleshless in mere seconds. Only, this foe is more than a man. Much more. So as the mechanical wolves begin to attack Swamp Thing, he grabs one out of the air that jumps towards him, and he thinks, they're strong, but so am I. And I have a hunch that, if enough pressure is applied, even a steel spine will. And with that thought, Swamp Thing brings his knee up very hard into the midsection of the wolf that he's throwing down, and we hear the snap of the robot wolf's spine. He basically pulls a Bane against Batman here. If you didn't know, Bane breaks Batman's back in a very similar way, although this is about 15 years before that. But Swamp Thing doesn't have time to revel in this finishing move because there are 4 more robot wolves attacking him. So he grabs the nearest one that's about to jump on him, and he begins prying open its jaws in an attempt to break them, and he thinks, they just keep coming, but I can't waste time. I've got to get inside that mission. My friends are behind those walls, and not hell, high water, or the blasted whole Conclave is going to stop me from reaching them. So as Swamp Thing takes off running towards the gates of the mission, we do see the Conclave henchmen on the upper walls, and they have guns, and one of them is yelling, open fire, the wolves aren't stopping him. So all of them begin shooting their Tommy guns at him, but as we know, bullets don't really slow Swamp Thing down, and he just keeps getting closer and closer to the gate, and right as he's about to crash into it, one of them yells, holy crud, Magnum shells don't even slow him down! The bloody monster's at the gate! And as Swamp Thing smashes into and through the gate, he thinks, correction, bucko, he's through the gate! And the gate bursts apart into splinters, and some of the henchmen are shaken from the walls that they were standing on, so they fall into the courtyard, and unluckily for them, the robot wolves were not programmed to only attack Swamp Thing. They are just programmed to attack everything. So they begin to run and attack all the henchmen, and Swamp Thing is able to just slink off while that's going on. And over this panel, the narration says, terror paints the courtyard a fresh blood red, as mechanized demons quit a moss-caked form for far easier prey, washing the scene with confusion, chaos, and an inescapable realization. And we see Ellery is watching the courtyard from a computer screen, and he's saying, blast that monster! It seems I've underestimated his tenacity. A mistake that could prove fatal if I linger here. So he turns his electric wheelchair, and he moves towards an exit, and he's saying, and since I have no desire to die a second time, but he's cut off as Swamp Thing yells, Ellery! And Dr. Pretorius turns to see Swamp Thing running in, and he says, what? No! Stop! You don't understand! But Swamp Thing just swats him aside, and as he rushes towards Ellery, he thinks, step aside, little man. My quarrel isn't with you. And Ellery, of course, can't really run away or do anything, and so he's terrified now, and he says, wait, you can't. But Swamp Thing approaches him and thinks, can't I? You murdered my wife, Ellery, and turned me into this thing. And God knows what you've done to these people. Talking about Matt, Abby, and Bolt. So he reaches out and grabs onto Ellery's wheelchair and forces Ellery to look at him. And we see that Ellery is very terrified at this moment. And so as Swamp Thing grabs hold of Ellery's shoulders, he thinks, "No, I turned away one time, fat man, and my friends here have paid for that compassion in pain. Now it's your turn." And he lifts Ellery and his wheelchair up in the air as Ellery yells, "No!" And then he throws him across the room near the machine that says danger high voltage. Now, they kind of showed it before a little bit, and I didn't mention it, but there is a power cord that is attached to Ellery's electric wheelchair, of course, because this is before battery-powered wheelchairs were a thing. So as Ellery smashes into the wall, his wheelchair is completely mangled, it's unoperable, and Ellery's unconscious body is tangled up in these mechanical parts. So Dr. Pretorius runs immediately over to Ellery and he says, my God, what have you done?" And as Swamp Thing stands towering over both of them, he thinks, "What should have been done long ago." And then Swamp Thing turns to go help Bolt get out of the electric chair he's strapped to, and Dr. Pretorius is trying to help Ellery, saying, "Don't worry, Mr. E. I'll save you." And Ellery is slowly coming back to consciousness, and he's moaning. Then we see Pretorius is able to flip the wheelchair back over, even though it can't really move on its own anymore, but it gets Mr. E to sit upright, and he says to Mr. E, "We'll go somewhere else. I'm sure the Conclave will help." And as he's saying this, he's not really paying attention to what's going on with the broken wire that is hanging off the back of the wheelchair. But Mr. E sees it and notices that it is whipping around really close to the danger high voltage sign. And he says, Pretorius, the cable, the wires." And as they begin to whip around and touch the electrical equipment, Dr. Pretorius doesn't notice at all, and he says, "No time to fix them now, sir. I'll have to get you to safety. The world needs you, Mr. E. It needs..." But he is cut off as the wires finally touch the live electrical equipment, electrifying Ellery's wheelchair, which of course begins electrocuting Ellery, and the force of it actually pushes Dr. Pretorius away from the wheelchair. And as he flies back, the narration in the panel says, "The sudden flash of electron fire etches the room with harsh shadows, filling the mission lab with the fury of energy unbound, as well as the acrid stench of charring flesh. Then slowly, the crisp crackle of electricity fades, leaving the room in a pall of stunned silence, until at last, we get a panel of what is left of the burned corpse of Ellery and his melted wheelchair on the ground. And as Swamp Thing and Abby stare at that, kind of in shock, we see Matt is pulling Bolt out of the chair, and he says to Swamp Thing, "Alec, give me a hand." And as Swamp Thing comes over to help, he says, "We've got to get Bolt to that helicopter before Ellery's lackeys come back." So as they're leaving the room, Dr. Pretorius says, "What? But you can't leave now. What about Mr. E?" And Swamp Thing doesn't even pay attention to Dr. Pretorius. He just throws Bolt over his shoulder and continues walking. But Matt stops and he turns around and says, "He's burnt toast, Pretorius. Now get out of the way." And Pretorius answers, But think of the world. What will happen to my machine now? And my plan? And me?" But Matt just turns around and follows his friends out of the room and leaves Pretorius there on his own. We get some narration as we see Pretorius just standing in the dark alone, and the narration says, "Portrait of a little man, an unstable ego held together by the string of contemporary paranoia. The too real dread of living in a world seemingly beyond the reach of human understanding. A situation the diffident Dr. Pretorius will soon have reason to fear." And we see in this panel, as Dr. Pretorius is standing there alone, all of a sudden the robot dogs begin to walk into the room. So it seems that he is about to be torn to shreds. Then we cut to a half hour later and a half mile in the sky, and we see that Matt Cable is flying one of the Conclave's helicopters, and they are flying high above the ocean, and Matt asks about Bolt, "How's he doing, Abby?" And Abby answers, "He's breathing, Matt, but just barely." And Matt replies, "Well, I'm pushing this thing as fast as it'll go, and I've radioed ahead to Miami International for an ambulance. The only thing to worry about now is..." And he is cut off by the sputtering sound of the engine, and as the helicopter lurches, Abby yells out, "Matt, what is it?" And Matt answers, "Looks like Ellery gets the last laugh after all. This thing's out of fuel. The tanks must be rigged to leak gas slowly if certain security switches aren't thrown. switches we knew nothing about. And Abby says, "But what can we do?" And Matt answers as he prepares for a crash landing, saying, "There's not a damn thing we can do, Abby. Just strap yourself in and pray, because we're going down." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.